My husband and his buddies staged a prank for my birthday, blindfolded me, dumped me at an abandoned gas station, and left laughing. I never went home. When they filed a missing person report, I was already sailing to Europe. 3 years later, they saw me on a billionaire's yacht as his wife. I found the email 3 days before my 35th birthday. EMTT had forgotten to log out of his account, something he never did. The message from Phoebe glowed on the monitor with sickening clarity. Can't wait for this weekend. Once she's out of the picture, we can finally stop sneaking around. The email thread stretched back 3 years. 3 whole years of lies while I cooked his meals, washed his clothes, and smiled at company parties. Evidence upon evidence cascaded before my eyes as I scrolled through intimate messages, hotel confirmations, and photographs I could never unsee. My hands trembled as I forwarded everything to my personal email account, the one EMTT knew nothing about. I heard his key in the front door and quickly closed the browser, my heart hammering against my ribs. When he walked in, I greeted him with the same kiss I'd given him for 12 years of marriage. He never suspected that something had fundamentally changed. Working late again tomorrow, he mentioned casually over dinner, not meeting my eyes. Big project deadline. I nodded, watching him twirl pasta around his fork. Of course, honey, I understand. The lie slipped from his lips as easily as air. I wondered how many big project deadlines had been nights in Phoebe's bed. That night, I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions. When had I become so invisible? What had I done to deserve this betrayal? The questions dissolved into a singular clarity. I deserved better. The next day brought an answer I hadn't expected. I'd left work early, feeling sick to my stomach from stress and sleeplessness. Our house sat at the end of a quiet suburban cul-de-sac, the kind where everyone had perfectly trimmed hedges and 2-car garages. I pulled into our neighbor's empty driveway instead of ours when I spotted EMTT's car parked out front hours before he should have been home. I approached our house from the side entrance, hearing voices from the back patio. EMTT's laugh rang out, followed by others. Crouching beneath the dining room window, I peered over the sill to see people lounged around our patio table drinking the expensive bourbon I'd given EMTT for Christmas. EMTT, Phoebe, and his 2 oldest friends, Finn and Luca. Isla, Luca's wife, wasn't present. Probably at home just as clueless as I had been until yesterday. So, it's settled then? Finn was saying, his voice slightly slurred. The birthday surprise. You sure this isn't too harsh? Luca asked, though his concerned tone was undermined by his smirk. EMTT shook his head. It's the perfect setup. We blindfold her, drive her around for an hour, and leave her at that old abandoned gas station out on Route 16. By the time she finds her way back, she'll get the message. The message that you're done playing house with your boring wife. Phoebe smirked, sliding her hand onto EMTT's thigh. My stomach clenched as EMTT leaned over to kiss her. Right there in our backyard on the patio furniture I had picked out. She's been so clingy lately, EMTT sighed, always asking questions, wanting to know where I've been. This will shake her up enough that when I tell her I want a divorce, she won't fight it. Phoebe's face lit up. And then we can finally stop hiding, getting rid of the problem wife. Finn raised his glass and they all clinked in agreement, laughing at my expense. I sank down beneath the window, my back against the siding, heart pounding in my ears. They weren't just planning to humiliate me. They were plotting to break me. A prank designed to make me more pliable for the divorce EMTT wanted. That night when EMTT came to bed smelling of bourbon and lies, I had already made my decision. Morning light filtered through our bedroom curtains as I stared at my open suitcase hidden in the back of my closet. For 2 days, I'd been quietly gathering essentials, important documents, photographs of my parents, the jewelry my grandmother had left me, things I couldn't bear to leave behind. I'd withdrawn our emergency cash from the joint account in small amounts, careful not to raise suspicions. $5,000 that would have to last until I figured out my next move. My hands shook slightly as I zipped up the suitcase and pushed it back into its hiding place. When I walked into the kitchen, I found EMTT making coffee, whistling tunelessly. "Morning sunshine," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Excited about your birthday tomorrow?" I forced my lips into a smile. "Very. Any hints about what you've planned?" His chuckle sent chills down my spine. Now that would ruin the surprise, wouldn't it? I nodded, accepting the coffee mug he handed me. I suppose it would. Throughout the day, I moved through our house like a ghost, touching things I would never see again, the porcelain vase we bought on our honeymoon, the throw blanket my mother had knitted before cancer took her. I said silent goodbyes to each item, knowing I was leaving nearly everything behind. I made EMTT's favorite dinner that night, pot roast with roasted potatoes and carrots. He praised the meal, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. After dinner, I asked innocently about his friends. "Will Finn and Luca be joining us for whatever you have planned tomorrow?" "Maybe," he replied noncommittally. "Why do you ask?" I shrugged. "Just curious. It's been a while since we've all hung out." Later, I made a phone call from the bathroom with the shower running, arranging for an Uber to pick me up at the gas station on Route 16 at approximately noon the next day. The driver seemed confused by the location, but agreed when I offered extra payment. That night, I lay awake beside my husband of 12 years, memorizing the ceiling patterns and listening to his even breathing. The man I had loved, built a life with, dedicated my youth to, was planning to humiliate and discard me. Tears slipped silently down my temples, soaking into my pillow. Dawn broke on my 35th birthday, and I rose early to make breakfast. Pancakes with strawberries and whipped cream, EMTT's favorite. He came downstairs looking pleased with himself. "Happy birthday, babe," he said, kissing my cheek. "I've got something special planned for today." "I can't wait," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. At 11, the doorbell rang. Finn and Lucas stood on our porch, grinning widely. Phoebe wasn't with them. Too obvious even for their crude plan. "Happy birthday, Isla," Finn boomed, handing me a small gift bag. Inside was an expensive silk scarf. I recognized the irony immediately. This would be my blindfold. "It's beautiful," I said, running the fabric between my fingers. "Why don't you put it on?" Lucas suggested, eyes gleaming with anticipation. "EMTT wants you to wear it for the surprise." I smiled and handed the scarf to EMTT, turning my back to him. "Would you do the honors, honey?" As the soft fabric covered my eyes and the world went dark, I felt EMTT's hands at the back of my head, tying the knot securely. His fingers lingered for a moment on my shoulders. "Ready for the best birthday surprise of your life?" he whispered in my ear. I nodded, allowing them to guide me toward what they thought would be my humiliation, but what I knew would be my escape. "Absolutely ready," I answered with the first genuine smile I'd worn in days. "Almost there," EMTT announced as the car slowed to a stop. The blindfold remained snug against my eyes, but I'd been counting the minutes, 47 since we left the house, long enough to be disorienting, just as they'd planned. Someone opened my door. EMTT's hand, warm and familiar, guided me out of the car and onto gravel that crunched beneath my shoes. The smell hit me immediately. Old gasoline, dust, and abandonment. Route 16's forgotten gas station. Exactly as I'd overheard. "Ready for your surprise?" Finn asked, his voice thick with barely contained laughter. "I can't wait," I replied, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. Rough hands, Lucas, I think, spun me around 3 times. I pretended to stumble, playing into their cruel game. Then, with theatrical flourish, EMTT removed my blindfold. The abandoned gas station looked even more desolate than I'd imagined. Shattered windows gaped like missing teeth in the weathered building. Faded signs advertised cigarette brands that hadn't existed for years. We stood at least 5 miles from the nearest occupied building. "Surprise!" the 3 men shouted, doubling over with laughter. I forced confusion onto my face. "I don't understand what's happening." "It's a test," Emmett said, his eyes cold despite his smile. "To see if you're as resourceful as you always claim to be." Finn held up my cell phone, which they'd taken from my purse before leaving the house. "No cheating." "You guys can't be serious," I said, allowing my voice to tremble. "You're just going to leave me here." "Don't worry," Luca chimed in. "Someone drives by eventually." The 3 of them backed toward the car, still laughing. I counted on what came next, their absolute confidence in my helplessness. "EMTT, please," I called out, the perfect picture of desperation. "Don't do this. It's my birthday." His hesitation was brief but noticeable. A flicker of something almost like guilt before Finn clapped him on the shoulder. The moment passed. "Find your way home, Isla," Emma called. "We'll see you whenever." The car doors slammed, the engine roared to life. Dust billowed around me as they pulled away, their laughter fading with distance. I waited until their car disappeared over the horizon before allowing my face to relax. Then I checked my watch. 11:47 a.m. My Uber would arrive in 13 minutes. I walked to the back of the abandoned building where I'd be hidden from the road. There, I removed my right boot and extracted the roll of emergency cash I'd stashed there. $800 that would help fund my escape. I changed quickly from my birthday outfit into jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a baseball cap I'd hidden in my large purse. At precisely noon, a blue sedan pulled into the gas station. The driver looked around nervously before spotting me emerging from behind the building. "Mrs. Reynolds," he called, using the fake name I'd given. "That's me," I replied with a wave. "Thanks for coming all the way out here." "No problem," he said, though his furrowed brow suggested otherwise. "Where to now?" "Marston Pond downtown." The driver nodded and we pulled away from the gas station, away from the life I was leaving behind. Mr. Marston was in his 70s, with arthritic hands and kind eyes that had seen every form of desperation. His shop smelled of old wood and metal polish. "What can I do for you today, miss?" he asked as I approached the counter. I removed my grandmother's pearl necklace, my diamond engagement ring, my wedding band, and the emerald earrings EMTT had given me for our 10th anniversary. I placed them all on the glass counter. "I need to know what these are worth," I said, my voice remarkably steady. Mr. Marston studied me over his half-moon glasses, seeing more than I wanted him to. Quietly, he began examining each piece. "This is fine jewelry," he commented, holding my engagement ring to the light. "Family heirlooms?" "Some of them?" I admitted, and he nodded, asking no further questions. After careful examination, he named a figure that was fair. "More than fair, actually. I can offer you $7,000 for the lot," he said. "Though I suspect they mean more to you than money." I swallowed hard. "Not anymore." Something in my expression must have spoken volumes. Mr. Marston disappeared into his back room and returned with something unexpected. A small handgun. I don't normally do this, he said quietly. But a woman traveling alone should have protection. He pushed it gently across the counter. It's registered and legal. Consider it a discount on the jewelry. I stared at the weapon, then back at him. How did you know I was leaving? 30 years in this business, he replied with a sad smile. I know the look of someone who needs a fresh start. I accepted both the cash and the gun, tucking the latter deep into my purse. Thank you. He nodded once. Good luck, wherever you're going. The bus station hummed with afternoon activity as I purchased a ticket to New York City. The overnight bus would get me there by morning. Enough time to make my international flight. I sat in the back corner of the waiting area, baseball cap pulled low, watching the entrance. Part of me still feared that EMTT would figure out my plan, that he'd come storming in to drag me home. But as the hours passed and boarding time approached, I began to believe I might actually escape. The bus rolled out of the station at dusk. As the familiar storefronts and street signs of my hometown slipped away into darkness, I felt something unexpected. Relief washing over me in powerful waves. No more pretending. No more silent tears. No more wondering when the next lie would come. In New York, I used an internet cafe to check in for my flight and print my boarding pass. I booked it using my maiden name, Isabella Chin, and paid in cash through a travel agency that catered to clients who preferred anonymity. The flight to Paris wasn't direct, with a layover in Iceland that would make me harder to track. Security at JFK barely glanced at my passport. Mr. Marston's gift remained safely mailed ahead to a French post office box I'd arranged online. Within hours, I was airborne, watching America disappear beneath clouds and distance. The Parisian hostel was in Montmartre, shabby but clean, with a shared bathroom and a narrow bed that squeaked with every movement. I sat on its edge that first night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the city filtering through the thin window. French conversations drifted up from the street below. Someone was playing an accordion in the distance. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery downstairs permeated everything. I'd done it. I'd actually escaped. My hands trembled as I opened the burner phone I'd purchased at the airport. No calls, no texts. In America, EMTT was probably just returning home, expecting to find me there, humiliated, defeated, and ready to accept whatever crumbs of a life he deigned to offer me. That I was here, an ocean away, free. Terror gripped me suddenly. What had I done? I had no job, no real plan, limited funds, and barely spoke the language. I was completely alone in a foreign country. But then, hadn't I been alone for years already? Married, but isolated, present, but unseen. I walked to the window and pushed it open, letting the cool Parisian night air wash over my face. The Sacré-Cœur Basilica glowed white against the darkened sky, a beacon on the hill. Somewhere in the distance, someone laughed. A genuine, joyful sound. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future shaped by my own hands. The thought was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was mine. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of my hostel room, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. I'd been in Paris for 2 weeks, and my resources were dwindling faster than anticipated. The romantic notion of escaping to France had met the harsh reality of being a foreigner with limited language skills and no employment history. That morning, I walked into the third employment agency I'd visited that week. My resume was sparse, deliberately so. I couldn't risk EMTT tracking me down if he ever decided to search for me. Isabella Chin, the receptionist called, mangling my maiden name with a French accent. The interviewer, Madame Rousseau, was a stern woman with impeccable posture and silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. She glanced at my paperwork with pursed lips. Your French is minimal, she noted in heavily accented English. I'm learning, I replied. Quickly, she raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. And your experience in administrative work? I answered vaguely. I'm organized, punctual, and I learn fast. She studied me for a long moment, then sighed. We have one position, receptionist at Lambert Financial. They need someone who speaks English for their international clients. My heart leapt. Financial. Don't get excited. You answer phones and greet clients. 3-month temporary contract. If they like you, perhaps it becomes permanent. I nodded eagerly. When can I start? Lambert Financial occupied the 3rd floor of a modest building in the 8th arrondissement. The office was smaller than I expected, just 15 employees. My desk sat near the entrance, a fortress of polished wood separating me from visitors. Bonjour, Lambert Financial, I practiced each morning before the office opened, trying to perfect my accent. Comment puis-je vous aider? My immediate supervisor, Giselle, was initially cold toward me. Another American taking a job a French person could have filled, she thought, but she softened slightly when she saw my determination to learn. Your pronunciation, she said one afternoon, wincing as I mangled a client's name over the phone. After I hung up, she added, let me help you. At lunch, while others went to nearby cafes, Giselle began teaching me proper French, correcting my grammar and pronunciation between bites of her sandwich. In return, I stayed late to help her with English reports. By night, I attended free language exchange meetups at a local bookstore. There, surrounded by expatriates and locals, I practiced conversation and gradually built a small social circle. Careful never to reveal too much about my past. My tiny studio apartment, rented with the last of my pawnshop money, became my sanctuary. Each night, I wrote down new French words I'd learned, repeating them until they felt natural on my tongue. The language became my armor. Each new phrase a brick in the wall between my past and present. 3 months into my contract, I noticed something odd while sorting mail. An invoice from a major client had been duplicated, and Lambert Financial had paid it twice. An error of nearly 40,000 euros. I hesitated, unsure if it was my place to point it out, but the duplicated invoice number nagged at me. "Excuse me," I said, knocking softly on the door of Philippe Lambert's office, the company's founder. I noticed something in the accounts that might be important. He looked up, surprised to see the receptionist in his doorway. When I explained the double payment, his expression shifted from annoyance to interest. The next day, Lambert Financial recovered the duplicate payment, and I received something unexpected, a promotion to administrative assistant. "You have good eyes," Philippe told me. "We need that." My new role gave me access to financial reports, client portfolios, and investment strategies. The language of finance came back to me easily. Numbers had always made sense in a way people sometimes didn't. While filing reports and organizing data, I absorbed everything I could about European markets. 6 months into my new life, I had established a routine. Work during the day, French lessons or quiet study in the evenings. On weekends, I explored Paris alone, finding comfort in anonymity. Occasionally late at night, I would wake from nightmares where EMTT found me, dragging me back to a life of humiliation. I'd bolt upright, heart racing, before remembering the ocean between us. One rainy Tuesday, I prepared the conference room for a client meeting. As I arranged water glasses and notepads, Philippe entered with Giselle and 2 senior advisors. "Isabella, could you bring the Mercer portfolio when you have a moment?" Philippe asked. I nodded and retrieved the file. As I placed it on the table, I noticed the investment strategy they had outlined. Something about it triggered an alarm in my mind. "Will that be all?" I asked, turning to leave. "Yes, thank you," Philippe replied. I hesitated at the door, my hand on the knob. The error was glaring to me. They were recommending significant investment into a sector that, based on reports I'd been filing for weeks, showed clear signs of instability. "Pardon," I said, turning back, but I couldn't help noticing the telecom investment strategy. The room fell silent. Administrative assistants didn't comment on investment strategies. "There's a report from last week," I continued, heart pounding, showing 3 major European telecom companies facing regulatory challenges. The timing might be problematic. Philippe's expression was unreadable. Giselle looked mortified on my behalf. "The report is in the blue folder. 3rd cabinet, 2nd drawer," I added, then promptly shut my mouth. After an excruciating silence, Philippe opened his briefcase and produced the very report I'd mentioned. He studied it, then looked up at me with narrowed eyes. "You read all the reports that come across your desk?" "Yes, sir," I admitted. "I find them educational." A client meeting wasn't the place for this conversation, so I was dismissed with a nod. I spent the rest of the day certain I would be fired for overstepping. Instead, Philippe called me into his office after hours. "How much do you know about financial markets?" he asked without preamble. "More than a receptionist should," I admitted. "Less than I'd like." He studied me with new interest. "Where did you learn?" "Self-taught," I replied. The half-truth was easier than explaining my previous life. "I've always been good with patterns and numbers." Philippe leaned back in his chair. "The Mercer account is important to us. Your observation today saved us from a potentially embarrassing recommendation." He paused. "Would you be interested in more responsibility here?" "What kind of responsibility?" "Analysis, research, behind the scenes, of course. Your French isn't ready for client-facing roles yet." I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. A flicker of genuine ambition. Not just survival, but purpose. "I would like that very much," I replied. That night, as I walked home along the Seine, the lights of Paris reflected in the water like stars. For the first time since arriving, I didn't feel like I was merely hiding. Isabella Chin, the woman I was becoming, had just taken her first real step forward. Not running from the past, but walking steadily towards something new. I stopped on Pont des Arts, watching boats glide beneath. Somewhere across the ocean, EMTT probably believed I was broken, defeated, perhaps even dead. He couldn't imagine what I was building here, brick by careful brick, a life completely beyond his reach. 6 months into my new role as a financial analyst at Lambert Financial, Philippe called me into his office. A man I didn't recognize sat across from his desk, tall with salt and pepper hair, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that spoke of wealth without shouting it. "Isabella, this is Mr. Tanner Reed," Philippe said, using the name I now answered to without hesitation. "He's the CEO of Atlantic Meridian Shipping." "Mr. Reed, this is Isabella Chin, the analyst I mentioned." Tanner Reed stood to shake my hand. His grip was firm, his blue eyes assessing me with open curiosity. "Mr. Lambert tells me you have an unusual talent for spotting market trends," he said, his American accent immediately recognizable. "Something about seeing patterns others miss." I smiled politely. I just pay attention to details. Isabella will organize your portfolio review, Philippe explained. Atlantic Meridian is expanding its European operations and they need our expertise on local investment opportunities. I nodded, accepting the assignment with professional detachment. It was the largest account I'd been given access to, a sign of Philippe's growing trust. As I turned to leave, Tanner Reed spoke again. Mr. Lambert mentioned you're American as well? I tensed slightly. Originally, yes, but Paris is home now. Something in my tone must have discouraged further questions. He simply nodded and returned to his conversation with Philippe. Atlantic Meridian's portfolio was massive. A sprawling network of shipping operations, property investments, and stock holdings. I spent weeks organizing the data, creating comprehensive analyses of their current positions and potential vulnerabilities. Tanner Reed returned to our offices frequently during this period. Sometimes he worked directly with me, asking pointed questions about European markets that revealed a sharp business mind beneath his reserved exterior. You flag our Mediterranean port investments as high risk, he noted during one session, tapping the report I'd prepared. Most analysts consider that region stable. Most analysts aren't looking at the labor unrest in key ports, I replied. 3 major strikes in 8 months with another likely before year's end. Combined with increasing fuel regulations that take effect next quarter, your operational costs will jump at least 17%. He studied me with newfound interest. And your recommendation? Strengthen your Northern European holdings instead. Less immediate profit potential, but significantly more stable for the next 3 years, particularly the Norwegian routes. 2 weeks later, the Mediterranean ports erupted in the largest shipping strike in 15 years. Atlantic Meridian, having shifted resources based partly on my analysis, weathered the crisis while competitors floundered. The following day, Tanner Reed arrived at our office with an unusual request. I'd like to borrow Miss Chin for a special project, he told Philippe. A consulting arrangement between our companies with her as the primary liaison. Philippe looked conflicted, pleased at the prestigious connection, but reluctant to lose my services. It would be a substantial contract, Tanner added, naming a figure that made Philippe's eyebrows rise. And so began my work with Atlantic Meridian. First 1 day a week, then 2, eventually becoming my primary focus. Tanner's Paris apartment served as our workspace, a stunning pied-à-terre with views of the Eiffel Tower. We worked long hours analyzing market data, restructuring investments, and planning strategic acquisitions. The shipping industry faces a critical juncture, Tanner explained one evening as we studied projections. Environmental regulations, automation, shifting trade agreements. Most of my competitors are reacting instead of preparing. I respected his foresight. Unlike most executives I'd encountered, he didn't chase quarterly profits at the expense of long-term stability. Our professional relationship developed a comfortable rhythm. I provided analysis. He made decisions. We rarely spoke of personal matters. An arrangement that suited us both until the market crash of 2023. It began with a major Asian bank's collapse, triggering a domino effect through global markets. Companies panicked, selling assets at devastating losses. Everyone's liquidating, Tanner said during an emergency call, his voice tight with stress. The board wants to follow suit. Don't, I replied immediately. This is exactly when you should be acquiring, not selling. Isabella, we could lose everything or emerge twice as strong. I pushed forward a contingency analysis I'd prepared months earlier. These shipping companies will be available at a fraction of their value. Their routes complement yours perfectly. The silence stretched between us. I'd overstepped. An analyst telling a CEO how to run his billion-dollar company during a global crisis. If you're wrong, he finally said, we both lose our careers. I'm not wrong. 3 days later, while competitors frantically sold assets, Atlantic Meridian began a careful acquisition strategy. Within 6 months, they had doubled their fleet size at minimal cost. When markets eventually stabilized, the company's value had tripled. Financial journals called it strategic genius. Only Tanner and I knew the truth, that a woman who had once been abandoned at a gas station had orchestrated one of the most successful corporate expansions in recent history. Our relationship shifted subtly after the crash. Tanner began asking my opinion on matters beyond financial analysis. We occasionally dined together after late work sessions, conversations extending beyond business to books, travel, and cautious glimpses of our pasts. I revealed little about America, only that I had left after a difficult divorce. He shared more freely. A marriage that ended when his wife decided corporate life was too demanding. A daughter in college who rarely called. One evening, after a particularly successful acquisition, he opened an expensive bottle of champagne in his apartment. To unlikely partnerships, he toasted. To new beginnings, I countered. Our glasses clinked, and something changed in the air between us. His eyes held mine a moment too long. Isabella, he said quietly, I've come to value more than just your financial insights. I set down my glass carefully. Tanner, I work for you. Technically, you work for Lambert Financial. The distinction doesn't eliminate the complication. He respected my hesitation. The subject wasn't raised again for months, though something had undeniably shifted. Our working dinners became less frequent, our interactions more strictly professional. Until the Tokyo conference, Atlantic Meridian hosted global shipping executives for a week of meetings. As Tanner's key advisor, I accompanied him, preparing presentations and analyzing competitors' strategies. On the final evening, watching him command a room of industry leaders with quiet authority, I acknowledged what I'd been denying. My feelings had evolved beyond professional admiration. Later that night, alone on the hotel's rooftop garden, I found him staring out at the Tokyo skyline. "You should be celebrating," I said, joining him at the railing. "The consortium agreement is a triumph. Some victories feel hollow without someone to share them with," he replied. The moment stretched between us, filled with unspoken possibilities. "I've spent 3 years rebuilding myself," I said finally, learning to trust my judgment again. "And what is your judgment telling you now?" I met his gaze steadily. "That fear is a poor foundation for decisions." His hand found mine on the railing, warm and steady. "I would never want to be another thing you fear, Isabella." 6 months later, we stood in a modest Paris courthouse, no elaborate ceremony, no extravagant reception, just us, Philippe and his wife as witnesses, and the simple words that bound our futures together. My wedding ring was nothing like the diamond EMTT had given me years ago. Tanner had chosen a band of twisted gold, imperfect, unique, resilient. The European financial press noted the marriage with mild interest. A shipping magnate weds his financial advisor. The American media focused on domestic scandals and political upheaval, paying no attention to a marriage across the Atlantic. That evening, on the balcony of what was now our Paris apartment, Tanner wrapped his arms around me from behind. "Any regrets, Mrs. Reed?" I leaned back against him, watching the city lights shimmer. "None. And you?" "Only that I didn't find you sooner." I smiled, thinking how differently our paths might have crossed in another life. If he had met the woman I was before, EMTT's overlooked wife, would he have seen what lay beneath the surface? "We found each other exactly when we were meant to," I replied, turning in his arms to kiss him. 3 years into our marriage, Tanner and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm between Paris and his other homes. Atlantic Meridian had grown substantially under our combined guidance. His vision paired with my analytical foresight, though I maintained my position with Lambert Financial, now serving almost exclusively as a consultant to Tanner's ventures. We were reviewing acquisition targets in his home office overlooking Central Park when an email notification flashed across his screen. He scanned it quickly, then looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Something interesting just came in," he said. "A mid-sized American construction company seeking financing for international expansion. Reynolds Construction." My heart stopped. Reynolds. EMTT's family business. The company his father had built and passed down to him. The one he'd been running into the ground even before I left. "Are you all right?" Tanner asked, noticing my sudden stillness. "You've gone pale." I nodded mechanically, trying to collect myself. "Reynolds Construction," I repeated. "Where are they based?" "Midwest. Started as residential but expanded to commercial about 5 years ago. They've hit some financial troubles but claim to have promising overseas contracts if they can secure funding." He studied me carefully. "Isabella, what is it?" We had a policy of honesty between us. A foundation built after both experiencing marriages constructed on lies. Still, I had never told him the complete truth about my past. "Reynolds was my married name," I said finally. "EMTT Reynolds was my ex-husband." Tanner's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of his surprise. "The husband you left after the incident you mentioned." I had given him only the barest outline. "A cruel prank in an abandoned gas station. My decision to leave America behind." "Yes," I took a deep breath. "I haven't seen or spoken to him since that day." "What does the email say exactly?" I asked. He turned his screen so I could read it. The message was from an intermediary broker seeking investment partners for Reynolds Construction's expansion. According to the brief, the company had overextended on several projects and needed significant capital to avoid bankruptcy. "It's odd," Tanner mused. "The broker claims they have contracts in Europe, but nothing specific. Usually, these requests include more concrete details." "Because there probably aren't any real contracts," I replied, a familiar bitterness rising in my throat. EMTT always had grand plans, but rarely the follow-through. Tanner leaned back in his chair. "I'll decline the meeting. There are better investment opportunities." Part of me wanted exactly that, to let EMTT's company sink without ever knowing how close he'd come to crossing paths with me again. But another part, the part that had been rebuilding itself for 3 years, wanted something else. "No," I said, surprising myself. "Take the meeting. I want to be there." Not for revenge, but I paused, searching for the right words. For closure, maybe to see him once on my terms. Tanner studied me with concern. "Are you certain?" I nodded slowly. "I've spent 3 years building this life. I'm not afraid of him anymore." The day of the meeting, I stood in our New York apartment, staring at my reflection. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A tailored charcoal suit that projected quiet authority. Pearl earrings that had been a gift from Tanner on our first anniversary. Hair styled in a sophisticated updo I never would have attempted in my previous life. "Second thoughts?" Tanner asked, adjusting his tie in the mirror beside me. "No," I met his gaze in the reflection. "Just preparing myself." He placed his hands gently on my shoulders. "Remember, you hold all the power here. If at any point you want to leave, just signal me." I covered his hand with mine. I know. Atlantic Meridian's New York headquarters occupied the upper floors of a sleek midtown tower. Tanner's corner office offered sweeping views of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. I positioned myself at the conference table with my back to the door, laptop open, documents arranged precisely. They were here, Tanner's assistant announced through the intercom. My pulse quickened, but my hands remained steady as I continued reviewing the financial statements. Statements that revealed just how badly EMTT had mismanaged his father's legacy. The door opened. I heard Tanner's professional greeting, then an achingly familiar voice that sent a chill down my spine. "Thanks for seeing us, Mr. Reed. I'm EMTT Reynolds, and this is my financial advisor, Marcus Clean." I didn't turn immediately. I let them enter fully, let them take seats across the table, let them begin their rehearsed pitch about global opportunities and temporary cash flow issues. Only then did I slowly raise my head. The recognition wasn't immediate. 3 years had changed me. Not just my appearance, but something fundamental in how I carried myself. I watched as EMTT's gaze passed over me, then snapped back, confusion giving way to disbelief. "Isla," the color drained from his face. "Isabella Reed," I corrected calmly. "Chief Strategic Advisor for Atlantic Meridian Shipping." I allowed myself a small smile. "And Mr. Reed's wife." Marcus Clean looked between us, bewildered. "You two know each other?" EMTT couldn't seem to form words. His mouth opened and closed, his eyes darting between Tanner and me as though trying to make sense of an impossible puzzle. "Mrs. Reed and I have a prior acquaintance," EMTT finally managed, his voice strained. "How fascinating," Tanner responded with practiced ease. "Small world indeed. Now, regarding your proposal, we've reviewed the preliminary figures and have some concerns about the viability." I slid a document across the table. "Your debt-to-asset ratio is problematic, and these overseas contracts you've mentioned. We'd need to see the signed agreements before considering any investment." EMTT stared at the document without seeing it. "You disappeared," he blurted out, ignoring the business discussion entirely. "We filed a missing person report. The police searched. There was an investigation." "How unfortunate for you," I replied evenly. "That must have been very distressing." 3 years, he continued, his composure cracking. "Not a word, not a trace. We thought you might be dead. And yet here I am," I gestured to the document. "Page 4 details our concerns about your cash flow projections." Marcus Clean attempted to salvage the meeting, pointing out potential growth areas and explaining away the company's financial weaknesses. But EMTT had stopped participating, his attention fixed entirely on me. When the formal discussion concluded, Tanner suggested Marcus speak with their financial team about additional documentation, leaving the three of us alone. The silence stretched uncomfortably until EMTT found his voice again. "Why?" he asked simply. I considered deflecting, considered silence, considered all the cutting responses I'd imagined over the years. But I told the truth. "Because you left me blindfolded at an abandoned gas station as a birthday prank. Because I overheard you and Phoebe planning to get rid of me. Because I deserved better than being the joke in your story." His face contorted. "It was just, don't," I interrupted. "Don't diminish what you did. Don't make excuses. It's been 3 years and I didn't come here for apologies or explanations." "Then why did you?" His voice was hollow. I glanced at Tanner, who had remained a supportive, silent presence. "Not for revenge, not to gloat over your company's failure or my success." I leaned forward slightly. "I came to show myself that you have no power over me anymore, that I could see you again and feel nothing." The truth of it washed over me as I spoke. The fear, the anger, the hurt. Somewhere along the way, those emotions had transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but release. EMTT looked utterly lost. "So that's it. 3 years of wondering and now you're just someone else's wife." "I'm my own person first," I corrected him. "Who happens to have found a partner who values me." I closed my laptop. "As for your funding request, we'll pass. Your company's fundamentals don't meet our investment criteria." I stood, extending my hand professionally. "Goodbye, EMTT." He stared at my outstretched hand, then looked up at my face. In his eyes, I saw the belated recognition of what he had thrown away. "As ta."